let me introduce to the stage some people you've met already this weekend if you've been with us, and one person you haven't. First of all, Mr. Ramsey Campbell, who's going to be hosting this session. Give him a round of applause. I'll give you this mic.
Hey.
Thank you very much.
Well, oh dear. Now, what do I do now?
Nothing, you take a seat.
Oh, all right, good. Excellent. I can do that. All right.
And Mr. Neil Marshall. Give him a round of applause. Mick Garris. Corin Hardy. And last but by no means least, Reece Shearsmith. Just before we kick off, Reece, something we wanted to show you last night at the beginning of the thing, and we didn't manage to. So we're just going to play it for you now. Little surprise. So, guys, if you could roll VT, if they say.
Hello, Grimmfest, and hello, Reece. I do hope you enjoyed seeing the thing again on the big screen. It's hard to believe that it's 40 years old this year. I'm also excited to see how much love there is still for a movie that old. It's a testament to the movie that it endures and would seem that people still love it. Reece, thanks again, and thank you for choosing The Thing as your favorite monster movie.
Right. I'll hand the microphone over to you guys.
There you go. Huh. Anybody want a glass of water, by the way?
I'm all right.
You okay? All right.
Water it up and get coffee.
Okay. Now, all right. I'll hold this close to my face and see what I can do. Okay. Just for the record, I mean, I know you know who all these guys are. In case anybody up there is thinking, who the bloody hell is this? I'm Ramsey Campbell. I write horror. First saw print 60 years ago, but I've also written extensively on the movies. Did a column in Video Watchdog for years, which is now collected as Ramsey's Rambles, and just recently delivered an over 70,000 word monograph on the Three Stooges. So those are my qualifications. So, American Werewolf, and werewolves generally, and monsters generally. It seems to me that the werewolf movie, and I suppose particularly the Universal Pictures werewolf movie, is a kind of continuing dialogue with an invented legend. Obviously, in this case, and in The Howling, when I remember it, you specifically refer to the Wolfman, Lon Chaney Jr. But in fact, that's preceded by The Werewolf of London, in which Henry Hull, you got two werewolves for the price of one. And in that, it's the werewolf kills the person he most loves. Now, Kurt Siodmak comes along and reverses that in The Wolfman, and it's, the person who most loves you will kill the Wolfman. He also puts in the five-pointed star, and I think we might come to that later on in the discussion, and other elements. And this film, American Werewolf, then proceeds, to jettison much of that legend. You don't need silver bullets, and basically, you don't need the person who loves you. In fact, they're no good at all, no use. I mean, you expect Jenny Agutter to have some sort of redemptive function within the film. But I suppose that what we have to say is it takes a kind of tragic function. So far, so good. Let me pass it on to you guys for thoughts.
Well, I just got one question. Is anybody seeing it for the first time today?
Whoa, lucky you. There's two.
Yeah.
It's been wicked, thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
And great to see it on the big screen for the first time as well. Does everybody else
What was your first time when you saw the movie?
First time I saw it was sadly on VHS.
Oh, ouch.
I was too young to see it at the cinema when it first came out, and I saw it on VHS for the first time. And I remember, I must have been like 12 maybe, but what I do remember about the first time was I didn't get the comedy really at all. Maybe some of the slapstick stuff is pretty obvious, but I was so shit scared by it the first time I saw it, and then it was like on the second time you started to really, really appreciate it. By the 30th time, I don't know how many, I've lost count how many times I've seen it now, but you see something new every time. It's just amazing.
I saw it on television, on actual. I think I saw it on either BBC Two or Channel 4. So I was 11 years old, and I remember specifically because we were on holiday. My family, my mum and dad would take us always to Cornwall camping, and they'd stop off at a place called Exmoor. And it just happened that the first time I saw American Werewolf in London, we stayed the night in this family farmhouse in the middle of a moor. And we've been playing...
the moor.
Exactly. We've been playing hide and seek up until dusk. And we went into this like stone kitchen, and there was this giant old English sheepdog that was terrifying, huge. And we'd always like come and pound at the door. And me and my friend Frank were like in these bright red sleeping bags. And I remember it vividly because there's this small television in the kitchen, and we sort of snuck it on at night. And I didn't know, when you're little, you don't know what a film, we didn't know what an American Werewolf in London was, never heard of it. There was no, I was too young. We watched that opening, and we saw these two guys in these bright puff jackets, David's red. And we didn't know what it was, and they were chatting, and it was sort of like, and then that first, like, that kind of distant howl, and it was just like it was outside in the moor where we were, and then suddenly this brutal attack, and it just, that queasy feeling you get, it gave me that sick, queasy feeling, like hiding in this sleeping bag, but the sleeping bag was defenseless because it was just like the puffer jacket that he just had lacerated, and that shot of his sort of naked body with, like, the punctuations in. Anyway, so it was a real, like, vivid start.
I think I must have seen it on video. I was too young to see it at the cinema, but it was again that. Yeah, I know. But I remember it being terrifying, and I think probably the first example that I can think of where I was afraid for the people because it felt so real, and their reactions to being scared on the moors. I'd never felt anything like it because it was like, that's what it'd be like. La, 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 walking along and hearing the noise of the werewolf coming out. Shit, David, what is that? And it was just felt really, I'd never seen acting like it, that it just completely connected with me as like, never mind all these gothic horrors that I've obviously loved forever, but this is what it would actually be like if you were in the dark with the noise surrounding, and I thought, and that really just connected with me as a proper, true horror. It was very frightening, and same as Neil, I never really got the comedy. I just thought it was terrifying. But bit by bit, obviously over the years, I've realised how brilliantly Landis it is, and it's so screwball in some places. I mean, and it's so funny. I mean, actually, and he knows what he's doing. Is that and an amazing depiction we were talking earlier about of Britain. How did Landis get it? I mean, he's such an Anglophile, but he completely gets it, yeah.
Well, I was lucky enough, and this is an old story now, to have worked on it and done publicity. And did publicity on it. I also have a cameo in The Howling, so speaking of werewolves.
And in Thriller, right?
Well, yes, and in Thriller as well. Is this? Yeah, it is on if I eat it. Yeah.
Can everyone hear us?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I was lucky enough to go see, well, first of all, Landis was hugely successful as a comedy director. He'd never made a horror movie. I mean, Schlock, his first movie was a monster comedy, but it wasn't scary at all. It was a comedy. So this was a real gamble, and it was not made by a studio. It was made independently, and then Universal picked it up for distribution. So it was made very cheaply for a studio-sized film. It was a $10 million movie at the time. But I got to go to a test screening, and I hadn't seen the film. I'd read the script and all, but to see it with an audience who had no idea, they'd never heard of it before. And so they went in fresh, but it was an American crowd, and the comedy worked like gangbusters. And John is such a master at defusing you with laughs before scaring the shit out of you and ripping the shit out of Griffin Dunn. But when you just tiny things like what Rick Baker did with the little dangling bit of flesh when Griffin Dunn's character is talking, it's intentional and it's itsy bitsy. And it's both ew and ooh at the same time.
So, Mick, was that the same version that we saw today that you saw at the preview?
Yeah, it was unchanged because it was such a successful sneak preview.
Because as I read it, originally the love scene was more explicit, or Landis wanted it to be more explicit, and certainly the killing of the 3 homeless guys apparently was much more graphic.
But I think it was, it may have been studio input, but I think it was more likely that the graphicness of the murder of the homeless guys was distracting from the propulsion of the storytelling.
A bit like the spider pit in Kong, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And well, just for the record, I mean, I first saw it on a press show in Liverpool, so I saw it on its original release on a big Odeon screen, bigger than this one actually. So that was an experience. And yeah, again, well, I had read a bit about it in Cine Fantastique, so I was a bit prepared, but not that much. You can't be that prepared till you've seen it. Now, this thing, I think, Reece, you were saying about the sense of Britain, right? Which was something I was going to come on to. I mean, in one sense, it's a bit as if a Hammer film, given East Proctor and the whole Slaughtered Lamb pub scene, has invaded contemporary Britain, is it not? It's spilled out into the Britain where you've actually sketched in. You've got the moneyed folk are having this dinner party with champagne or whatever it is, and in the middle, Jenny Agatha trying to survive on her income as a nurse, and on the riverbank, on the embankment, the homeless. So you've got the whole sense of 80s Britain, really, have you not? It's not obviously not the first, because Night of the Living Dead and things of that say have preceded it, but it's certainly, is it not the first horror movie? It's not quite the first horror movie to bring the werewolf into contemporary life, is it? There's a Fred F. Sears movie, The Werewolf, in fact,
right?
In which
in 1956.
Yeah, that's right. It's a very strange movie. It sort of conflates the atomic monster threat with the universal monster conventions. Because on the one hand, this poor old guy, it's more like, in a way, like Losey's The Damned. He's created as a werewolf by these two the sort of scientists that we see in movies like this, who've decided there's going to be an apocalypse. The only people who are going to survive are werewolves, or words to that effect, mutants. So they make him into a mutant. But at the end, the local sheriff in this perfectly contemporary town says, let's go and the townsfolk all go out with flaming torches. And there's this kind of lame explanation saying, well, it might scare him off. But really, we sort of slip back into Universal. There's this strange conflation of the traditional horror movie and the modern in certainly in American Werewolf.
It's why it works so well.
Yeah, I think so. Well, of course, the story is, wasn't it, that it was the backers, or the potential backers said, basically, it's too scary for a comedy and too funny for a horror movie, and which is why it took them 10 years to set up. And yet, one thing that did strike me a bit was that not that many people here today were actually laughing that much, do you think? Which is, it's not a reflection on anything or anybody, neither the movie nor the audience, obviously. But I think it's one of the earliest films to conflate horror and comedy. It's not comic relief. Although I guess you do have the two policemen, or the one policeman, the sort of Stan Laurel policeman. I think that's pretty well pointed out with the Laurel and Hardy comic, actually, and it's great routine with the dishes, the metal dishes. And yet in a way, he's the policeman who's on the ball. He knows that, he believes to some extent that there may be something to this. He just he's not able to make his point clearly or forcefully enough.
One thing about this movie is, unlike most genre movies until that time, you don't spend half of the movie trying to convince people that it's real. We are shown the reality of it right up front. He gets ripped to shreds by a werewolf, and it takes a little while for David to learn what's going on, but there's not an hour of plodding around with policemen and plodding around with doctors and how can this possibly be? And But the joie de vivre of this, it was very competitive because Landis wrote this when he was 19 years old. And it took 10 years for him to get it made. And he and Rick Baker had plotted these makeup effects that were groundbreaking and never done before. And then Rick Baker, because they kept getting a red light and a red light, Rick Baker agreed to work with Joe Dante on The Howling. And so John got the green light, and Rick said, well, I'm busy with The Howling now. And he said, you bastard, how can you do this? And that is what John would do, as Reece knows well. And so that's how Rob Bottin got the job to do The Howling, because he was an assistant. He worked under Rick Baker. Yeah, and so they have these two competing werewolf movies, both in 1981, with the transformation effects that had never been done before.
And if I remember correctly, because I think this film's so unique, so special, and so still groundbreaking. And one of the factors, I think, is when a director gets a certain point in their career, and am I right in thinking that he had just done Animal House before?
He had done the Blues Brothers.
Blues Brothers, sorry.
Yeah.
Blues Brothers, exactly. And so he had this mega smash and could do almost anything next. But instead of, continuing to do some studio picture, he did the movie that he wanted to do for 10 years. That was this, werewolf movie that he hadn't been able to make previously, and was able to actually execute something like that with these, the effect sequences that took days and days and days. That is why we sort of see it on that screen, because it's only, like The Thing, it's that commitment to being able to achieve that level that then lives on forever.
And The Thing was only 1 year later.
Right.
And although The Howling kind of beat it to the cinemas by a couple of months or something like that, wasn't it? But then the history of it is that they invented an Oscar category just for this movie.
The very first Oscar for makeup was given to Rick Baker for that.
Yeah, and rightly so.
And rightly so.
Absolutely. Let me ask this now, just as a general thing. I could expand on this if you want me to, but what do we make of the Jewish element in the American Werewolf?
Landis is Jewish, and he brought it in. He brought his youth into it, a backpacking Jewish kid with his buddy, and bringing in the Nazism and all. That's all. It's all part of Landis's personality, and anyone who's met him, and everyone up here, knows that he's a bigger than life character. And what comes in here goes out here.
And because I gather he wrote it whilst. I know he was working on Kelly's Heroes. So he wrote it after he'd essentially toured Europe himself. So it was very kind of autobiographical from that point of view.
Especially the wolf.
I screened American Werewolf on Halloween last year, and John kindly did an intro live on Zoom in my little local cinema. Immediately agreed to sort of beam in, and one of the stories, or he told this great 10-minute story of, I think when, as you were saying, when he was doing Kelly's Heroes, he was in Europe and he saw this, I think this funeral that was happening, and he had this idea of they would bury them just at the side of the road, if I'm correct, and he had this idea, but for American Werewolf, of this funeral and this body just coming back to life, like in Europe. But and just going to that England setting, I think for me as well, it was we'd grown up on a lot of American movies and American heroes in America, and sort of having it suddenly just be really real in our. I live in the countryside. It just all felt very real, and having these American heroes who also just are getting kind of cut up and destroyed before us was just really brought it all home.
Like victory.
But also, and I didn't understand any of the Jewishness in it until I was a lot older. But the whole Nazi attack, now I can kind of get what it was about. But obviously, that whole I had never seen that double dream sequence scare done before. Where
groundbreaking in many ways.
Yeah, you get the massive shock of it and the intense violence, and then you go, everything's just a dream. Suddenly it's
I just want to show you John got me these. My slaughtered lamb socks. There they are. Yeah, I know. I've never worn them, but now there's no better day than to wear them today.
You've been looking forward to that.
I have, yeah.
Just a severed foot.
Yeah, exactly. 2 feet, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I again, it's so visceral, and those dream sequences when he's sort of hallucinating of himself through the woods, so haunting and brilliant. And I don't think I'd seen anything like that either. Sort of a depiction of a waking nightmare, or just the hallucinatory. The juxtaposition of the hospital bed in the woods, it takes your breath away. And even now, when he wakes up and he's got that horrible white face and the teeth and the eyes, and the sound is brilliant. You hear it all the time now with sort of monster movies and squealing and roaring like lions in the mouths of werewolves. But this was the sort of first time for me that all hit home and was brought together in something that just felt so real in the world. And to see it in London and to have Yorkshire Moors and Brian Glover in there as well, which it just felt all so true. And the performances, again, completely real and believable. And their friendship, Griffin Dunn and David Norton, is brilliant. And it's so moving as well. You sort of feel the agony of him being awake with the undead. And apparently the porno cinema, John said it used to be Cartoon House, yeah. And I think it was going to be that originally, but you changed it to the porno for See You Next Wednesday to come back up, yeah. Of course you do, Mick.
You're not in that film, eh?
Well, but the other thing to remember about this that people rarely bring up is Elmer Bernstein's score. It's so special and so grand and so emotional. And
it's a very straight score compared to,
it's not a horror score.
It's pure,
it's
drama
not
and emotions.
Yeah, and the people in it are played for real. They're two friends on the moors walking and backpacking, and their chatter is believable and completely composed and like two friends would be. And everything in it plays so much more real. And there's also, it's less civilized than a Hammer film. That's a very American quality that John brings to everything he does. And it's so special, and it's unlike anything else before or since.
I think, didn't Elmer Bernstein, because I saw John hosted a night of Elmer's music at the Royal Albert Hall, and he played, the orchestra played, because he insisted on doing it. He said, I've got to score the transformation scene. And John was like, I'm not going to use it. Because he always had it in his mind that it would be To Blue Moon. But it's a beautiful, amazing, the full works of that transformation scene scored in that with complete orchestra, and it's brilliant. You can hear it. I think you can get it online. You can hear it. But yeah, check it out. It's great.
Well, I was just going to say, just 1 second. No, I was just going to say that I think especially in the UK, we've taken this film very much to heart. And it's so ingrained in our culture now, like we know stuff from it. I remember watching The Fast Show, and there's an episode there where like two tourists go to a petrol station in the middle of nowhere, and a character pops up and says, "That's enough," and you know exactly what it is. And this is like 10, 15 years after the film. And I was saying I was driving through the Brecon Beacons years ago, just driving through the Brecon Beacons on my way somewhere, and crossing this moor somewhere, and I like suddenly slammed on the brakes and pulled the car over, and I was like, I've been here before, I know this place. And I got out of the car and I looked around and suddenly realized it was the crossing at the beginning of the movie.
Oh, wow.
It was where this pulls up in the sheep thing. I was like, how did I know that? And yet there it was. And it was like, oh shit, I'm at the beginning of American Werewolf. I have to go and find the slaughtered lamb now.
Beware the moor.
Yeah. So yeah, it's all trapped in here.
I hope you went for a little stroll.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, just to return briefly to the Jewish thing. I mean, as you say, it's the double nightmare. You can read sort of the nightmare doesn't end in another sense too. And now I'm one of these guys. I don't know about anybody else on the panel in the audience. Who if you get the newspaper on screen, my eye always goes down past what you're supposed to read to the rest of it, and it's nearly always surreally irrelevant, because they haven't bothered mocking up the entire page. But here, and this may again just be an absolute coincidence, I find it kind of interesting that what's beneath it is a story about the rise of the New National Front. So if you hadn't spotted that before, no. Next time you see the movie, and I know you're going to see it again. Check that out. But it seems to me again. I mean, I don't know. I'm being too analytical here, but the very fact that we see them being turned out from among sheep in their first appearance on screen, is this not the scapegoat? Is that not what the monster is in this movie? In a way, I mean, for what? That's a matter of discussion. But maybe I can sort of open this out. Well, actually, Neil, just let me ask before I open this a bit further. I mean, did you feel sort of in dialogue with the werewolf tradition in Dog Soldiers?
Well, yeah, to a point, but I think it's one of those things that so much of the werewolf tradition has come from the movies that we've seen, and you kind of, as Landis did, you kind of pick and choose which bits you want to use or don't. Because when I was researching Dog Soldiers, not obviously. Clearly, I was like massively inspired by this and The Howling, but I was also reading the Reverend Sabine Baring Gould's Book of Werewolves, which was written many years ago, and it was that thing of like you just take whatever mythology kind of works for the story. Really, I tried not to get too bogged down by it because my whole thing was not about the curse of the werewolf so much. But I did bring in, silver and stuff like that. I kind of like that element, so I kept that. But yeah, otherwise it's just like, pick and choose.
Yeah, it's sort of, well, I was going to say, it's kind of crucial that in your film, whereas ordinarily, certainly in 50s movies in particular, the army would show up at the end and destroy the monster. The army is pretty well the monster, which, is again a move forward, and one suspects an ominous one too, actually, So, I mean, Mick, you apart from working on The Howling, you've been involved with Lycanthropy, have you not? Not personally, but in terms of creation. I don't know that. Well, I don't know that either. That's right.
Well, it's all about the transition from person to monster. When I made Sleepwalkers, that was the same part of it. It all is rooted in Jekyll and Hyde and Robert Louis Stevenson, because we all have a monster within us. And sometimes it takes more for it to be unleashed for some of us than for others. But that duality, the Descartes kind of element of who we are and who we might be and are capable of being is a pretty potent part of the werewolf mythos that even in Sleepwalkers they were werecats, I guess. But it still comes from the same rooted place.
Thoughts on monsters?
Well, monsters, that's what we're here to talk about, isn't it? And I mean, it is in the greatest monster movies of all time. I really was inspired by that balance of the way emotion is. It's actually, the movie moves so efficiently, and it always kind of gets me. You sort of settle into it and you forget that last sort of insane carnage in the last sort of 10 minutes. And it just takes you on this ride from when they go to the cinema. And then every time when she's running down the alley saying, David, I get really overwhelmed with emotion because, oh shit, not only is it the end of the film, but what's just about to happen. I always forget what's about to happen and how this like tragic love story, this sort of Romeo and Juliet moment of, their union and not being allowed to have it. And when I was working on my first film, The Hallow, absolutely the monster effects and the practical effects, I was sort of dedicated to trying to pull a transformation off, but also make it feel painful in that way. Never seen that sort of absolute agony that he goes through.
Hurt, wouldn't it?
Yeah, bones extending and combining that with this sort of tragic love story was really important too.
Yeah, and I think the takeaway for me as who went on to sort of do dark comedy horror, this was the first one that did it to me successfully as a flag in the sand of you can do it brilliantly, and it's not easy to do because you can fail on both counts and it can be a curate's egg, and I think John is a master at it. He does a lot. I said to him, he said, if I have one thing I think I do to get the comedy, he said, it's always reaction shots, and that's an interesting take because I was watching it again with that in mind today, but yeah, he's a true master of, like Mick said, of sort of pulling the rug from under you and then, but allowing, and it's not, I mean, there are some bits in it that are pure. John loves Laurel and Hardy, and you can absolutely see it, of course, in the depiction of the two policemen. what are they called? Villiers and something else? I can't remember the name. It's Villiers and somebody, but yeah. And apparently the other policeman that picks up all the dishes, he's a playwright. He went on to be a quite famous playwright, yeah. He's brilliant in that part. Because they're really not on screen very long, but they completely sell that double act. And those moments are so brilliantly done. It's delicious to watch it.
So much of it is through John Woodvine's straight face reactions to it all.
Yeah.
Because it's the way that he shifts tones, but like as you say, their kind of bumbling idiot comedy plays off John Woodvine's playing it dead straight, and he's wonderful in the movie. But I think the shift of tones, especially at the end, where you're literally like in tears for Agatha because she's so brilliant in the film, and it's so sad, and then he suddenly cuts to the really cheerful version of Blue Moon for the end credits, like just when you're thinking, oh, this is sad, nope, boom, we're off on a song. I love that sudden shift; is great.
And it should be pointed out that very few horror comedies are either funny or scary. Yeah. You know, to try to do both is a very, very difficult tightrope to walk. Mm-hmm. And this does it. This, and amazingly, The Howling did the same thing. But they are horror movies that are funny and not comedies that are horrific.
No. I guess, I mean, I suppose I suppose I'd venture James Whale as the first to put them together, and not necessarily as comic relief, because I mean there are lots and lots of gags in Bride of Frankenstein for sure. And I mean, for the record, I've always argued that the Bride of Frankenstein is Dr. Pretorius. You know, basically, seduces old Frankenstein away from his wife, and they go off and create life together.
But the Invisible Man as well.
The Invisible Man, or indeed, actually, the first one that comes to mind is when Colin Clive is told, in Frankenstein, they put the wrong brain in. He does this kind of classic double take, which is it's very funny, but at the same time quite disturbing in the context. I'm just going to throw this in completely randomly because I meant to put it in earlier, but I can't. One little bit of werewolf tradition nobody has used since The Wolfman is the seasonal aspect of lycanthropy. Because, spring, well, the seasonal aspect, because look, spring, summer, and winter, you're fine, but the autumn moon, you're buggered. There's only the autumn moon, but in fact, not in these movies, it's not.
Well, that would be boring.
Well, I understand that, yeah. And it actually doesn't even look like autumn in the film, as I remember it. Anyway. Now, do we want to discuss our monsters more, or should we throw it open to the audience?
Come on, you've got this amazing panel. Some of you must have a question. You might want to ask something more general about monster movies or about everybody's particular work or films. Anyone? Yes. Okay.
Brave soul.
Thank you. I thought I might as well. It's interesting, I think, that Ramsey talks about the werewolf being linked to the sort of cycles of the season. Because, most obviously, particularly to a female audience member, he's very much a menstrual monster. And anyone that's been around or lived with a woman with PMS will probably, recognize the signs. Why do you think it is, given the obviousness of that the only movie I can bring to mind that really addresses that through the werewolf is Ginger Snaps?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I made a fairly crass comment on it in Dog Soldiers toward the end. It's very brief. Yeah. But the Ginger Snaps obviously is like the entire movie about.
Well, I co-created a series called She-Wolf of London, a terrible series. But what I wanted the ad line to be was, when it's her time of the month, watch out. They wouldn't let me do that.
Sounds like a no-brainer. Someone's asking what year it was, Mick.
That had to be 1990. 91, maybe.
Anybody else got a
It's
question?
shot in Bristol, by the way.
Question for Reece. In The League of Gentlemen, there's very many Royston Vasey-esque bits in The American Werewolf, like the statue, and when they're coming in on the road. I was just expecting to see the local shop. How much were you obviously affected by that?
I can't remember. I think probably by osmosis there must have been, yeah. I mean, I didn't realise quite. I I think Brian Glover says there's nothing for you here, doesn't he? And I don't think we got that from him, but I think that was with Nail. I think there's nothing for you here. I'll get out of here when they go to the tea rooms in Penrith. But of course, it's that whole sequence of the slaughtered lamb and them arriving and everyone stopping and the dartboard and everything. It feels like there's not a time when that hasn't existed, of course, but that it sort of is encapsulated in this film, that the locals not, someone arriving and the locals not being too kind to them or being suspicious of them. So we completely ran with that idea with our local shop, and there's certainly an element of the slaughtered lamb about in Tubbs and Edward, I guess. Yeah.
August Toast just held up his hand with the pentagram on the palm.
Pentagram on the palm. Did John Carpenter just actually say my name? I still can't believe it. I know I've been stuck on that since. Amazing.
Your face went.
Yeah. What?
Any more questions, folks?
Yes, the back.
We're running out of time, so.
Yeah, dead quick. You probably know far more than me anyway, but just wondered why he didn't go back and make more horror movies.
He made Innocent Blood quite soon after.
Have to ask him that one.
Yeah.
And someone else did American Werewolf in Paris, didn't they?
Yes.
Can't remember that.
The guy who did Mute Witness.
He did Masters of Horror.
John did Masters of Horror. Yeah, he did 2 episodes of Masters of Horror. Dear Woman, which was co-written by his son Max at the age of 19, the same age John was when he did American Werewolf, and an episode called Family that's really spectacular. So he never left the genre.
I suppose there's also the thing that when how do you top that?
Yes.
That's always going to be a problem.
I think I have one more question, but did you just say he was 19 when he made American Werewolf?
When he wrote American
When he wrote it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Another question. Last one, I think, if that's okay.
Hi. I remember the American Werewolf was particularly significant to me, apart from all the reasons that you've all discussed already, was that it was the first werewolf film I saw where the monster was wolf-like and walked on all fours as opposed to being the more humanoid upright. What are your thoughts about that in about the last couple of minutes?
I got into a little bit of bother with that one because I said, I'd been quoted several times as saying that as much as I love the transformation in that movie, I really didn't like the fact that it walked around on 4 legs. I preferred the werewolves in The Howling walking around on 2 legs. I thought werewolves should be bipedal. And I visited the set, I visited Landis on set in London doing Burke and Hare, and I was sitting at the monitor and he came in and he said, I want to introduce you to Rick. And I turned around and there's Rick Baker. I'd never met him before. And Rick just stares at me and says, you're the guy who said the werewolf should be on 2 legs and not 4. And he held my stare for so long and I was like, oh my God, total deer in the headlights. And eventually he said, I agree with you. That was John's idea.
And by the way, Rick really did not want the transformation to be shot in full daylight. Right. That was something Landis insisted on, and Rick said, it's gonna look like rubber. It's not gonna look real, but he was insistent, and it works like gangbusters, and it changed the course of monster movie history.
Can I ask a quick question for all of us? What's your favourite shot in the transformation sequence?
Well, aside from the cutaway to Mickey Mouse. No, my favourite shot is the one where it opens its eyes and stares at the camera with the full werewolf eyes. Yeah.
Mine, I think, is on his back, where the spine comes through and the hair comes through.
Yeah. Because mine's too. It's the heel stretching and the hand stretching. That kind of.
Mine is when he is on his back, but his body he's obviously through the floor and he's got the long legs. Yeah, that's the best bit. That's the best bit. So you're all wrong.
And he really has a mane.
That's right.
Yeah.
Like the coat, the red coat becomes the same mane.
It's really awkward looking and like painful and clumsy. I love that. It flops around.
Do you see these bastards have left me hardly any body parts? Well, I'm going to say the face changing from human to, yeah, that's great. That's my favourite. Yeah, that's right.
I always love the fact that he sets up the fact that he leaves the front door of the house open. Yeah. So to explain how he gets out of the house. That he strips off his clothes and he leaves both of the doors open. Right the way through the transformation.
He doesn't explain how he gets on the bus and pays for it with a red coat.
No.
Money in the pocket. Money in the pocket. Yeah.
Okay, guys, I think we have to wrap this up. Thank you very much. Give them all a round of applause. That was wonderful and insightful. Thank you so much.